In just a few weeks' time, Monster Hunter Rise will no longer be the latest game in the franchise. As such, I wanted to give the game one final goodbye. To do so, I replayed through all of base game in order to remember the pros and cons of Rise, and to dive back into the reasons why Rise created such a divide in the community. We'll touch on Sunbreak a little bit later on as well, so make sure you stick around to the end. With that being said, let's go back in time to March 2021. The release of Monster Hunter Rise as a Nintendo Switch exclusive sparked a division within the community. While many fans celebrated the game for its innovative mechanics, diverse playstyle options, and an engaging Wirebug system, others felt excluded due to the game's initial ties to the Switch, a console with much less powerful hardware compared to the PC, PlayStation, and Xbox systems which had previously hosted the latest title, Monster Hunter World. New 5th generation players had grown accustomed to the Monster Hunter World experience and were quick to express their frustrations at having to either invest in a new console or wait for a later port. But in general, the main issue vocalised by the community was this feeling that Rise went in a backwards direction. And this division was only exacerbated by differing expectations regarding the graphical quality of the game, as well as performance. Switch players praised Rise for making the most of the system's hardware while maintaining the core Monster Hunter experience. However, other fans argued that the game felt like a step back in terms of scale and visuals, which was only natural given the compromises needed to optimise Rise for the Switch. What many 5th generation players didn't recognise at the time, however, was that Monster Hunter games historically release what are known as portable games. Portable games offer a unique experience to what would otherwise be considered mainline titles. And yes, I'm using these terms quite loosely as the whole system kind of confuses me to this day. And as you can tell, I was one of the players that didn't understand the concept of portable games back when Rise came out. Yet even so, I did unconditionally love Rise. It was the first Monster Hunter game I personally ever got to play from release day. It was the first game I got to experience the full game cycle from title updates all the way up to expansion launch. After all, I only got into World around the time Alatreon came out, so genuinely I'm still quite new to the franchise in the grand scheme of things. The eventual release of Rise on PC in early 2022 helped bridge the gap. However, the delay in availability left some still feeling like they had been abandoned after falling in love with World. And while visuals and performance did improve when ported over to PC, as well as the other consoles, many still viewed Rise as a step back. And as mentioned, this created a divide within the community, and echoes of all of these complaints are still being heard here today in 2025. I sincerely believe a good portion of the Rise hate derives from this very issue. People like to hold on to their discrepancies, even though there was no longer anything stopping them from buying Rise on other consoles. Because this opportunity had originally been ripped away from them, some players stubbornly refused to give Capcom their hard-earned money. On the flip side, then you have people like me that buy the game twice because it's just a fun game. At the end of the day, I believe all of this came down to one simple question. Was your first Monster Hunter game World? If so, you were more likely going to be one of the players against Rise. Had you started in anything prior to World, Rise was likely an incredible title by all means, and the game being exclusive to the Switch was likely the least of your concerns. Straight up, some of the haters probably saw the Nintendo logo and immediately took up arms against the game, forming opinions to justify their distaste in a disingenuous manner. And look, the game isn't perfect. There's a bunch of problem areas and the game has fundamental differences to World that justifies why some people don't like it. And we are going to touch on that as we move forward in the video. Even still, after over 1,000 votes from my community, which primarily consists of active Monster Hunter players, it's crazy to see the amount of people who either have never played Rise or at the very least never finished it. Well okay, let's talk about the gameplay a little bit. So Rise gave us a bunch of different ways to alternate our weapon playstyles in a manner similar to Generations Ultimate, and Capcom expanded even further on this as we moved into Sunbreak. Every weapon had additional moves ranging from slight adjustments to a weapons-based moveset, all the way up to the more flashy switch skills which would allow the hunter to deal big damage, punish incoming attacks with counters, etc, etc. And not only that, you could also swap them out on the fly. This meant during different stages of a particular fight, you could alternate your approach right there and then. In a similar manner to how Wilds is approaching this issue by giving the player two weapons, Rise would allow you to fight a monster in one sort of hunting style and then immediately swap over when it's more beneficial to do so. For Longsword, this meant I can play a sort of counter style where I focus on pretty much eye slashing and foresighting every single attack. and then during damage opening opportunities I can swap over to a higher yielding damage combo. Arguments are often made that this added bloat to the game. Others argue these moves made the game too easy, or that it simply made the game goofy. There might be a level of substance tucked away behind these layers, but for me personally these additions certainly made the game more fun. And this loops back into earlier discussions with the whole portable versus non-portable games. There's a split in the community, with some leaning into the more realistic, weighty nature of world, while others prefer the more high-octane superhero type feeling provided by games like Rise. Of course, there is a middle ground shared by many of us that enjoy both. However, I do understand how one could prefer World but not Rise, and vice versa. We also then have the Wirebug system, which did tie into switch skills, but also played a foundational role in general gameplay. Need to close distance? Use a Wirebug. Get knocked down and want to spring back into combat? Use a Wirebug. This mechanic sped up the flow of combat in a major way, which I would argue was necessary in a Monster Hunter title that, in general, was faster. On top of this, Wirebugs did greatly benefit the exploration side of things in Rise. Level design aligned with the range of movement now made possible by the player. Areas of combat were separated from areas of exploration, so even while a monster was moving from area to area, you could Wirebug over obstacles to take a more direct route and use your Palamute to traverse the remaining distance. Downtime is few and far between in Rise, to say the least. Developers likely wanted the player to spend as much time engaging in combat as possible, so they trimmed out the fat in between. Ultimately, we could discuss this topic in its varying guises for hours on end. And with so much more to cover today, I don't want to get too deep with this, so let's talk more in the comment section. Do you prefer the gameplay in Rise? If so, let me know why. And subscribe if you're enjoying the video so far. I've got to get my cheeky plug in. Moving on, Rampages were a brand new game mode introduced in base game. I did already make a video discussing this in more detail, but I'll give you the sped up version here. Capcom likely saw potential in siege type quests we saw in World, including things like Zora Magdaros or Corv Taroth. Not wanting this experiment to full close early, the team converted it into Rampages, which offered an improved, more engaging version of the experience. And along with it came many new introductions such as NPC ultimate attacks, being able to swap equipment out on the fly, and we even had regular hunter combat interjected in between. However, the player base at large did not like this format of hunting. When combining my opinion with the large quantity of viewer feedback in the comment section of my Rampage video, I see the main issue boiling down to this. Rampages took you away from the traditional gameplay format for too long, with very little reward or reason for doing so. Players love fighting monsters with their weapon. In Rampages, you only do this for maybe 30% of the quest, and in terms of rewards, well, you can make Rampage weapons, well yeah, that's pretty much it. Even though the system truly was an improvement to anything previously seen, it just wasn't a good fit according to the player base's wants or needs. Luckily for us, we weren't forced into doing this. I think objectively it's 3 quests that you're required to complete in Rampages, so it wasn't a huge deal, but maybe this could have been so much more. There was value in it breaking up general gameplay, which allowed me to enjoy it, but overall I think we won't see Rampages return anytime soon. Now, one thing I can for sure say we all wanted was a finished game, and on release, Rise just wasn't. If you weren't aware, we didn't even have the ending to Rise's story until a couple title updates onward months later, and base game in general was lacking in content to say the least. Unfortunately, development time was hindered by the highly unique circumstances we experienced in 2020, so by no means am I blaming Capcom for this. I suppose the real question is, did Capcom handle the situation correctly? They chose to give us the game in March and updated to fill the gaps later on, but maybe should the whole game have been delayed in order to give us the full product from the get-go? In a weird way, getting an unfinished game and having the remaining pieces placed later on kind of gave Rise more longevity. It was a reason to keep coming back, and with the story lingering in the back of our mind for a while, it made the final discovery of Narwa the All-Mother so much more interesting. But again, to play devil's advocate, how much better could the titled updates have been if they added additional content instead of retroactively finishing the core game? Once Rise later released on other platforms, this was of course a non-issue. As much as you might have hated the long wait to finally play the game, at least PC, Xbox and PlayStation players got the final product in all its glory. And then, a shiny new expansion made its way to the spotlight, Sunbreak. The TLDR on Sunbreak was take what was good in Rise and expand on it. New monsters, switch skills, armor sets, weapons, the list goes on. Much like its base game counterpart, Sunbreak wasn't without quote-unquote controversial choices. For example, skill bloat ended up being a major point of discussion, with builds being equipped with every useful skill you can imagine having. However, my main issue in Sunbreak was the endgame grinding system, Anomaly Investigations. A driving part of Sunbreak's plot was of course the Curio, these little leeches that power up monsters to extremely high heights. Capcom leaned into this concept and gave what I would classify as a purely artificially difficult endgame system. Take any monster of your choice, multiply its HP by 3, and make every move one shot. Sound fun? To me at least it wasn't. Difficulty in Monster Hunter will always be a delicate area to get right, and in the process of carrying out new experiments, we're bound to hit a few speed bumps here and there. However, in my personal opinion, and you're more than welcome to disagree with me here, I understand, the anomaly system was bad. But not only that, the anomaly level cap constantly got adjusted higher and higher, and unless you actively kept coming back to level this to the latest cap, you ended up being locked out of a bunch of insanely good decorations, and the longer you waited, the longer this grind became to catch up, and that's why I did never catch up. I didn't like the system, so I chose to avoid it. But luckily, you also didn't need to engage with this for the most part. Yes, the OP decorations are nice, but at the same time, why do you need them if you're not taking on the hardest content? Without grinding the Anomaly Investigation system too much, I still had a largely powerful build that allowed me to take on every piece of content Rise had to offer. So it's not like I missed out on anything by not partaking in it, but players that did choose to partake in it got to reach even higher heights of power to take on even higher heights of difficult monsters. So as much as I might not like it, fundamentally I can see that us as players were ultimately given a choice as to whether or not we want to do it, and if you didn't, no problem. If you did, great. And don't get me wrong, there are positives to the system. Whenever I talk to people about Worlds, the general consensus I get is people only boot up the game to fight Fatalis or Alatreon, and then they just log off. But through this anomaly system, regular monsters like Gos Harag or Tigrex, etc. powered up to a point where they still offer you a great challenge. And there is value to that, definitely. It just wasn't for me on this occasion. Throughout this video, I've tried my best to remove personal bias and discuss the game through a more objective lens. But for this next portion, I want to speak from the heart on what became one of my favourite games of all time. Rise released 5 days before I started my first ever job on the 1st of April 2021. This essentially meant my final few days of freedom and zero responsibility were spent grinding through base game. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't anxious for the road ahead of me, however this brand new Monster Hunter title put me in high spirits before walking forward. Now being a fully fledged adult with a working career coming up to 4 years, I often find myself reminiscing about this time. Some people might find this cringy, but honestly speaking, the first few days of the game's launch were honestly the best way I could have imagined spending the end of what I'd call my student days. As mentioned earlier on, Rise was in fact the first Monster Hunter game I ever had the pleasure of playing from launch day until the final title update. And this journey is what moulded me into a good Monster Hunter player. Before this, I had blindly stumbled through World and was trying my best to catch up to the existing player base with little luck. But Rise gave me this steady learning opportunity and a clear pathway to improve. Ultimately, Rise would make me love Monster Hunter even more than I already did, and when really thinking about it, had I not played Rise, I doubt I would have cared enough about the franchise to make this channel years later. Now as we approach the release of Wilds, I've become the veteran player ready to guide others and watch a whole new generation of hunters run forward towards a path I once had to walk down myself. I'm truly way too excited for the 28th of February, and I hope you all join me on the adventure. I'll be streaming as much of my first playthrough as possible, and of course plan on making a bunch of videos for you all. If you did watch this far, please consider subscribing to the channel, and watch the video on screen now where I discuss rampages in greater detail. Thanks for watching.